In content production, and especially in video production, the image is only half the story. And as you know, on my channel, I oftentimes discuss different types of microphones for different use cases. Today, the story is no different. I am talking about a Lavalier, specifically a wireless Lavalier kit, which comes in this little black box. And actually, there's a little bit of a story around this, why it actually has this box, and I will cover what is in the box, what this device will be used for, the technical specifications, a little bit of a comparison between other devices that are in a similar use case, and of course, I will give you my conclusion. Now, for full disclosure, this box was sent to me by Hollyland for the purpose of making this review, and I will be able to keep this box once the review is done. My video is going to be published without the company actually having a look at it beforehand, so this is my honest opinion that I want to share with you, also comparing this to the other devices that some of them I have actually purchased myself and others I also got for review purposes. Now, jumping straight into this, what is actually in this little black box? And opening this up, we actually can see there are three little devices in there. One, we have a microphone or a little tiny transmitter. Then we have another one. So we have two transmitters in this box. And then last but not least, we also have this right here, which is the receiver for both of these transmitters. And what you can see right now already is that these transmitters actually have been paired to this receiver. And they are practically fully functional at this point. Something really cool about this box is that it is not just a carrying case, it is also a charging dock for all of these three parts and also has a battery built into it. This is really handy because you can basically recharge the transmitters as well as the receiver just by plugging them into these boxes right here. Now, the cool thing there is that this is actually magnetic, so it just snaps into these places really nicely, and I think that that actually is a very cool aspect of this whole set. Something that you might not like about this is that you practically have to always have this with you if you want to charge these tiny devices, because they don't really have any of their own USB-C ports. So they are with less ports, they just have these metal connectors right here at the bottom, which are there to be able to charge, which have the counterparts on the inside of this case. You can also put something really small at the top right here. I just have these foam balls for the Lavalier microphones, because that's also something that you get in the box. You get these Lavalier microphones, and you have two of them. So you have the Lavalier with a clamp as well as the foam ball. And these are TRS Lavaliers. So these are made for the use with cameras or with this type of wireless connection and such things. And there are two of them. Then we have the TRS to TRS adapter cable, or the mini jack to mini jack cable, so that you can plug in the transmitter or the receiver to your camera. Then we also have these huge wind fluffs. Now, these are not for use with the Lavaliers themselves, but rather with the transmitter built-in microphones. So this is how you would plug them in. You have this knob right here, which goes into the 3.5mm jack, and then you have the microphone going through here, and you have a really cool wind fluff there. And last but not least, you also have a USB-C to USB-A cable, and this is also going to be covered once more in the downside section. You have this cable, it works, however, there is something I want to talk about. We also have this whole little bag right here, which is really nice so that you can package it all, have everything in here with the microphones and all, because in this box, even though you have really nice places for the transmitters and the receiver, however, there's really not that much space to also put the microphones in here with everything. There's also a little bit of paperwork and documentation as well as manuals in the box. However, overall, that's everything. And that's also pretty cool because you get everything in the box to mic up two people with their transmitters, have one receiver on the camera, and start filming, including Lavalier microphones right from the get-go. And I have to say, I have previously covered the Comica Boom XD2, which is also a very similar set. However, it does not have the charging capabilities that this set has, and it had a lot of other downfalls as well, to the point that I actually have not used it since that video was produced, essentially. Because in my comparison, the Røde Wireless Go, which I also have right here, is a way better choice for my use cases. However, the Røde Wireless Go also still has this major downfall, which is that it only has the ability to use one transmitter and one receiver at a time, except for buying two completely separate sets, which of course is way more expensive than, for example, a set like the Lark 150 or even the Comica Boom XD2, which both cost around $300 or 300 euros. But the benefit of a set like this with the Lark 150 is that you have two transmitters. And both of these transmitters actually also have a built-in microphone as well as a mini jack or 3.5mm jack to connect a Lavalier or anything else to it. So that's really handy right there. This unit also has a mute button right here on the side, as well as a on-off switch. However, you really don't necessarily need that unless you are going to leave this on your talent for a long time. But if you plug it into the charging case, it actually also turns off automatically. Then of course we have these metal bits at the bottom, which are for recharging from the base station. And there is a little hole on the side, which is for resetting the device. As far as I've experienced this, these transmitters actually pair with the receiver automatically when you plug them into the box right here. And with that, we have these two. And of course, again, we have the receiver as well. Now, on the receiver side, this is a bit bigger than with many other devices of this category. For example, the Boom XD2, which I have covered on my channel, and I will have a link in the description below. And of course, it's also a bit bigger than the receiver of the Røde Wireless Go. But again, we have that ability to use two microphones or two lavaliers at the same time. Now here we have these two knobs on the left and right side, and they are essentially for changing the settings. So we have, for example, in this case, we can change the gain of the left channel right here and the right channel right there. And then we also can mute these microphones by simply pressing these buttons. So these are knobs that can be turned as well as pressed. We also have a on-off switch on the side. We have a headphone jack in case your camera does not support a headphone jack, so that you can monitor the audio coming from the wireless units. Then we also have the charging port at the back, which automatically connects to the box basically. And then we have the line out and the reset button on the other side. On the lower side, we have a clip which you can use to plug this onto your camera into the hot shoe or the cold shoe, essentially. So that's everything on this device. There's really not that much to it. Now, the really cool thing with this type of setup where you have two transmitters and one receiver is if the receiver has different modes available. And that's actually the case here with the Lark 150. You have a mono mixdown mode, you have a left-right split mode, as well as a safety track mode. Now, the mono mixdown mode essentially takes the signal from both of these transmitters and mixes it down to one signal, which then is output on the left as well as the right channel at the exact same volume. The signal, of course, still can be monitored and changed with these knobs right here so that you can level it out whether you have one person speaking a little louder than the other. But at the end, you will just have one audio signal. With left-right split mode, you basically take both of these and they are going to be recorded to the left and right channel of your camera. so that you basically can take that signal in your editing program and split those two channels, and you have full control over each individual microphone on their separate tracks. And lastly, with the safety track mode, you have a mode where, again, both of them are going to be mixed down to one signal, or if you just use one of them, of course, just that one signal is going to be mixed down. However, you're going to have the left at 0 dB, and then the right channel will be lowered in gain. With this mode, you can actually kind of protect yourself from a little bit of the wrong settings that you might have done. So for example, if you chose your gain a little too hot and the signal is clipping and crackling on you in the editing program, you can choose to use the secondary track, which is a couple dB lower, so that the clipping hopefully has not happened on that channel. Now, those modes are really powerful, and they are definitely one of the main selling points of a unit like this. A couple of different use cases for these different modes are as follows. If you, for example, want to do live streaming and you want to just stream that signal as you are recording it or as you are seeing it with your camera directly to the internet, then of course the mono mixdown would probably be the smartest idea. Then if you have the ability to edit in post and you want to have those two people, for example, that have those lavaliers on their body separate so that you can later on adjust the levels and also maybe adjust the EQ for one person differently than the other, then the stereo split is probably the best option for you. And if you just have one person and you want that peace of mind of having a safety track, then of course the safety track option is probably one of the smartest ideas. I especially like the safety track on shoots like I'm doing in this studio here, where I'm just recording myself and I cannot monitor the audio continually all the time, so that I at least know that there is that safety that if I end up clipping or for whatever reason having the wrong setting or the too hot of a signal, then I have that safety track. Now, of course, in the studio, I usually use the F6, which is 32-bit float audio recorder, and there I don't have that necessarily because it does handle those things differently. But in that kind of unit where you want to just have everything very nice and small on camera or even with your smartphone, those modes are definitely a lifesaver in those different settings. Now, since this device is that small and really doesn't have any buttons, to use these different modes, the manufacturer has repurposed these mute buttons here left and right. If you are in mono mode, for example, to switch to safety track mode, you just press and hold the left button and then it switches to safety track mode. Then with that, you can also switch to stereo mode by doing the same thing, just holding that button. And here in the stereo mode, you can actually also switch which microphone is on which channel, and that's done by pressing the right hand button right there. And then you will notice that the LED light here at the top will actually change color. So if I press and hold here, then you can see now we have the blue there and the turquoise there, and those colors actually kind of match the LEDs on the other side on the transmitters, because that way you know which one is recorded into which channel. So now again, if I press and hold the right hand side in stereo mode, it switches and now they don't match up anymore, and pressing and holding that again, it switches back. So those are essentially all the settings you have. Of course, you can still change the gain on each of the different channels. And even in stereo mode, of course, that makes a lot of sense if you want, for example, to make sure that the gain is set for each individual person. And of course, you also can still mute the channels on the receiver, but not just that, you can also mute them on the transmitter. So for example, if I have this right here and I press this button shortly, then you can see that it is muted up here with the yellow indicator so that the connection's not there. And there we are back unmuted. This is especially useful if you want your talent to keep the transmitter on them when they are, for example, going to the bathroom for a short break or similar things, so that there's the possibility to mute as well as unmute on both devices. So if I mute on the transmitter, that also means that I can actually unmute on the receiver. So it goes both ways, but actually it is kind of useful that that is a possibility. Now, what about the Lavalier that comes in the box? And I have that right here. I do have to say it probably isn't the smallest Lavalier that you will ever see. It also has a relatively huge clip compared to other Lavaliers that I have had. And of course, also the cable is relatively cheap feeling, and I wouldn't necessarily try to tug on it all that hard. And something else I noticed is that you don't have any locking mechanism on the other side. You just plug that into the jack right there, and now we have this Lavalier connected to the transmitter right here, and we can have this on a belt or someplace else. Of course, you can also just use the built-in microphone, which you have right there. Now, a couple of technical specifications about these different things. The weight on these different things is 20.5 grams for the transmitter. So that's super light, super easy to hide. And you can actually just also have that right there, for example, if you had to. It really doesn't weigh that much and is very easy to handle. The receiver, on the other hand, is about as heavy as two of them with 51 grams, so it's a little more than two of the transmitters. And then we have the case, and I have weighed that at about 250 grams. In comparison, both of the units of the Røde Wireless Go with about 31 grams, so they're about 10 grams heavier than the transmitters on the Lark 150. And then I also have the Track E, which I want to bring into this comparison with these different devices. And this one goes with about 57 grams. However, this is also a recorder and not a wireless unit. So this actually records the audio signal. It has timecode syncing, and of course also has a micro SD card in it. So that's also why it might be a little heavier. Now let's talk battery life. And of course, there's this special case, that this comes with, which extends the battery life by a good chunk. But of course, that also takes into consideration that you are able to stop recording during the time that you are using the whole set. But with that, we have the transmitter with about 200 milliamp hours in battery, and that converts to about 4.5 hours of record time. Then we also have the receiver, and on the receiver we have 530 milliamp hours, and that goes around for about 7.5 hours of record time or use time. And of course, we also have the case, and the case has a total of 3,350 milliamp hours, and with that you can recharge everything about 2.5 times. So that's really cool that you basically get double the use time of this whole set with this case, and of course with that really easy use case of just plugging it in and having it charge easy as that. Now, something else that is really cool is that the receiver has a better battery life than one of the transmitters, which also means that potentially you can even use one of the transmitters and the receiver with each other and then just switch out the transmitter and continue shooting. So if you are only using one transmitter at a time, that might also be something of use for you. However, the charge times of this whole set aren't that bad either. The transmitters recharge in about 1.5 hours, the receiver in about 2 hours, and the case itself within about 2.5 hours. Now, something to note about charging and battery life. I have previously mentioned that this whole set comes with a USB-A to USB-C cable. Now, that's really cool that they include that. However, I have mentioned previously on this channel, and this device sadly is no different, that using USB-C on your device is not really enough if you then can't charge the device with proper USB-C to USB-C power bricks. And I have once more tested this case and this set with all kinds of different power adapters, all kinds of different cables, and the only cables that I got to work were USB-A to USB-C cables. I have mentioned this many times over with the Comica Boom XD2, as well as the DED VMic D3 Pro, which all were not able to charge with USB-C to USB-C cables. So please be aware of that. If you are using everything USB-C, this does not support that. This is in contrast to, for example, the Røde Wireless Go or the Røde Video Mic NTG, which both have a USB-C port, but they also can be charged with just about any USB-C charger. Now, this is maybe not really an important point for you. However, for me, actually, it has begun to become a little bit of an annoyance to find this still to be the case in all kinds of technical details or technical devices, like, for example, this set. So that's why I am pointing this out, in the hopes that future generations of these types of devices, newer versions of these devices, actually will feature true USB-C to USB-C compatibility. Now, with that rant, let's talk about the microphones that are built into this, as well as shipped with it. The inbuilt microphone on the transmitter, as well as the Lavalier that comes in the box, both are a omnidirectional capsule. It also says that it has a pickup frequency range from 20 Hz all the way to 20,000 Hz. A very broad range for a microphone like this, and most higher end microphones don't even cover that range. So I'm not really sure what to make of that. The dynamic range of these microphones is specified with 100 dBA, which is okay, not the most amazing, but good for the use case of all of the things that you can do with it, and especially if you're just using it with this type of use case where you have it as a lavalier on your clothing. And in the same vein, we also have the maximum sound pressure of 100 decibels. So this is not a microphone that you want to use in a super loud environment, like, for example, inside of a club where there's also music playing and all of those things, which can sometimes reach over 100 dB, even in environmental noise. However, again, if you're using this for interviews or in studio work like I'm doing right here, that's really not going to be a problem. The range on the transmitter to receiver is specified with about 100 meters. However, that's not something that I'm going to be testing, because this is really not something that I often care about, because this type of setup in my use case is usually used within arm's length of the camera, or maybe 10 meters or 15 meters away. However, if you are in a room like that, then you will not have problems with that. That's at least the part that I can tell you. I'm also not going to test how this goes through walls and similar things. That's simply not the use case for me. And overall, the latency is anywhere between 2 milliseconds and 5 milliseconds, which again is totally workable for pretty much any environment, especially with video shooting purpose. And now, one of the last things that I want to mention in terms of the feature set of this before going into sound tests, as well as my conclusion down the end, is that this also features something that they call DSP Intelligent Noise Cancellation. Now, this is stated to reduce the low frequency noise of the environment so that you don't have to do as much work in the post-processing. Now, I personally would prefer if this device would just give me the sound that it records in the best possible quality without processing that sound in any way. However, it kind of sounds like they have an inbuilt low-cut filter. I can understand that for certain use cases, and especially for use cases where you, for example, want to directly deliver the file or the audio that comes from these in a live streaming environment, or maybe just shooting the video and then uploading it to Instagram, YouTube, or what have you, this could be actually a really cool feature. I would have preferred if I could actually turn this on and off myself. However, that's not a possibility as far as I know. And now the last technical specification that I want to bore you with is the price. This device costs around $329 in the US and 335 euros in Germany as of recording this video. And I have to say that for that price, it at least is a relatively complete package for the purpose of recording two people at the exact same time with these different features, and also having those lavaliers already in the box. That's definitely a great plus for this whole kit. Now with those things covered, let's jump into some sound samples of the Lark 150, the inbuilt microphone, as well as the Lavalier that it comes with, comparing it to the Røde Wireless Go, which is kind of flying around here. And as I've mentioned before, I'm also throwing the Tentacle Track E into the mix of comparing the sound quality of these devices. All of these test recordings have been done on the Zoom F6, which is a 32-bit floating point audio recorder, so that it provides the best quality that I can provide here in this environment. For that purpose, of course, I also used a Rode VXLR adapter, which essentially adapts the XLR that the Zoom F6 needs to the mini jack that these devices provide for recording purposes. This is the version that does not transform anything, so it does not really add much noise or any noise at all to the signal, and it is the cleanest signal that I can record in this environment. Now with that said, let's jump into these sound comparisons. Dig deep within yourself, for there's a fountain of goodness ever ready to flow if you will keep digging. Dig deep within yourself, for there's a fountain of goodness ever ready to flow if you will keep digging. Dig deep within yourself, for there is a fountain of goodness ever ready to flow if you will keep digging. Dig deep within yourself, for there is a fountain of goodness ever ready to flow if you will keep digging. Dig deep within yourself, for there is a fountain of goodness ever ready to flow if you will keep digging. Dig deep within yourself, for there is a fountain of goodness ever ready to flow if you will keep digging. Dig deep within yourself, for there is a fountain of goodness ever ready to flow if you will keep digging. Dig deep within yourself, for there is a fountain of goodness ever ready to flow if you will keep digging. Dig deep within yourself, for there is a fountain of goodness ever ready to flow if you will keep digging. Dig deep within yourself, for there is a fountain of goodness ever ready to flow if you will keep digging. Dig deep within yourself, for there is a fountain of goodness ever ready to flow if you will keep digging. Dig deep within yourself, for there is a fountain of goodness ever ready to flow if you will keep digging. Dig deep within yourself, for there is a fountain of goodness ever ready to flow if you will keep digging. Now with these sound samples, you have to judge for yourself which of these solutions sounds best to you. And of course, maybe not just the best, but also which of these is worth your money. Now, I would say if I look at the wireless solutions, the Røde Wireless Go has a cleaner and a lower noise signal than the Lark 150. And this is with the inbuilt microphone itself. However, we are also talking about a device where one transmitter, one receiver already costs as much as the whole kit with 2 Lavalier microphones, 2 transmitters, 1 receiver, and a charging box costs on the Lark 150 side. So that's something to always have in consideration when comparing something like the Røde Wireless Go with something like the Lark 150. This might not even be the same customer that is even thinking about these devices. When comparing the different Lavalier microphones in this test, the SmartLav Plus from Rode, the Lark 150 microphone, as well as the Sennheiser ME2, or at least it's kind of like that, with the Track E as the audio recorder, I actually have to say that I was positively surprised with the microphone that ships with the Lark 150. It has a really low bassy tone to it. However, in terms of noise floor or in terms of noise in general, that microphone in that combination sounded really good. So that actually is something that I found relatively pleasing to listen to. And the noise, again, on the Lark 150, I did not like it as much. However, if you're continuously speaking and you don't just have silent sections where you're pulling up the gain, then you also usually don't have that many problems with the noise floor. Now, just talking about the Lark 150 and the microphone that it ships with, I would have to say it is really the best idea to level yourself correctly and maybe even send a bit of a louder signal to your camera so that that camera also can be set to the lowest gain setting possible so that you don't introduce much noise on that end. I have to say that if you are setting your gain levels right and you have your voice leveled nice and clear, then again, the noise floor also does not become as huge of a problem. But at the end of the day, it is your ears that have to like the sound of the microphone. And of course, also you have to be able to either work with the signal that you are getting from the device, or you can choose to use something different. If this is in your price bracket, maybe that's how you start out and then upgrade from there. But now it is conclusion time with highlights and also the downsides that I have found with the Lark 150. A couple of the highlights are that you have those different modes available. You have the stereo mode, the mono mixdown, as well as the safety track mode. That is definitely a huge plus. And with that, also the fact that you have two transmitters and you can use them together with just one receiver and plug that onto your camera. And with that, just you are ready to go and you can record interviews very easily. Even podcasts might be possible with this type of setup, and you don't need any other gear except for a camera or a phone that you can connect these things to. Now, the case is also really powerful that you can just charge everything in one, and you also don't need multiple USB-C cables. You can just charge everything at the same time inside of this case. That is really powerful, and I have also mentioned this in my previous review about the Comica Boom XD2, which as far as I remember only came with one USB-C to A cable, so you actually had to charge every single device one after the other unless you had enough USB-C cables lying around. So that's definitely a plus that you have this ability. And with that case, you also have the great ability that you actually get a little bit of more time to use all of this at the set if you are not in close proximity to any wall outlet, because you basically can just plug your receiver or your transmitters right into that case, and after 15 minutes, you have almost 1 hour or maybe even 2 hours of use out of that case just like that. So that battery in this case is also a really cool feature. Then I also really like the volume dials on the receiver, that they are really these nice big knobs, and even that they are a little bit protected here on the side, that it's not as easy to change them accidentally. Of course, also the mute on both sides is really helpful, that you can either do that on the transmitter or on the receiver. I also like that you have the headphone port on the receiver, so in case you have a camera that has a mic in but not a headphone in, or headphone out rather, that makes this also a very cool feature that you can real-time monitor the audio signal coming from the transmitters. And I also really like the size of these transmitters as well as the weight. They are tiny and they're really, really light. So that's really cool. And of course, then also using the Lavalier microphone. Now here, I would have liked the clamp to be smaller. This is literally huge compared to other clamps that I have seen. And also these teeth are really harsh, and I don't know how well your clothing will do with those on. So if you have sensitive clothing, you might not want to use this clamp. Now to the downsides. I don't like the plastic build on this. It is really, really cheap plastic, and I don't know how well these will hold up. Then again, you also usually don't throw these things around, and if you are careful, I think they are going to hold up pretty well. The case actually really feels solid compared to that. So that actually has a really nice feel. It also has a really nice click when you close it. So that's really cool. The transmitters and the receiver are the ones that really feel plasticky. So that's that. The same thing kind of goes for the microphone. The cord really feels cheap, and I would not try to use this a lot. If you are using this a lot, I don't know how long the connections will hold up. Now the screen on this device is something that I also think is a little bit tiny. This might have been better placed on the upside here and then a bit bigger, but it is functional. Now something with that screen is also that I don't really like that there are no settings, or basically no settings except for changing the modes, the volume and muting. I would have liked the option to at least also disable this weird noise cancellation or noise suppression that they have built in. That would have been something that I would have liked to see. But again, having less settings is something that is also really powerful for the right customer, because it might not make as much sense there. Especially if you just want to use this thing, don't care about other details, and you just want to get going. For that purpose, once more, this is, I think, a really good device. And lastly, a couple of things about charging. I already mentioned and ranted about the USB-C part. I don't really get why the USB-C to A thing is still a thing and not proper USB-C to USB-C cables. Now, one of the biggest questions with these type of devices is always, who is this device for? And I would say one of the main use cases that I can see for this is something like live streaming or Instagram Live, where you are in person with two people. And of course, that might be a little problematic at these times, but once we can meet up again more easily, then this type of set can be really, really powerful to meet in person and have two people mic'd up, for example, for an Instagram Live or a YouTube Live or any of those kind of situations. Maybe even for use cases like a Clubhouse nowadays, where you can have two people speaking at the same time, hooked up with all of this to your phone. Now, something to note there is that I definitely see this kit be used by people that are using phones as their main camera, or use this for live streaming on a phone, for example, to Facebook Live or Instagram Live. However, something to note there is that the cable this kit comes with is a TRS cable, and for phone connections, you would need a TRRS cable. I will link one down below, which is also an adapter, so that you can use this cable that it comes with, but also be able to connect this whole set to your phone. And with iPhones, of course, you will also need an adapter from TRRS to then go into the Lightning port. But I have videos about that, and that is definitely something that is worth looking into. Overall, the cable could have been multi-use, that would have been great, or include a TRRS and a TRS cable, or at least at one end, so that this whole set is compatible with phones as well as with cameras. Then, of course, this whole set is made for interview purposes. So that's definitely the use case for this, especially with that stereo split mode, where you can have those two people separated in the left and right channel for changes in the post-processing. That's also something where I would say maybe you could even use this for podcasting. And of course, hobby filmmakers and also people starting out. Now, for the type of setups that I just talked about, I think this is a solid buy, especially if you are planning to do multi-people or at least two people shoots more often. Now, of course, you can buy more expensive equipment that might sound a bit better. For example, the Røde Wireless Go. However, to make a price comparison here is that the Røde Wireless Go, including the Lavalier Go, for example, to have a Lavalier set as well, costs $50 more than this whole set. And here you can record up to two people at the same time, and you have those Lavaliers all included. With the Røde Wireless Go, you get one receiver, one transmitter, and one microphone. So that's not enough to do multi-people shoots. Of course, you can buy two Røde Wireless Go, but then you need also the whole set times two, which of course means you have a price of over $600, which is all included in this set for about $330. So if you are planning on doing those two people interviews or similar things, and this is the budget that you have, then I would say go for it. Start doing what you are already doing and create your content. From that point on, you of course always can step up your game, invest further in the future. Now, if you're just doing one-person videos and you're planning on never doing interviews, or at least not in the foreseeable future, then I would say maybe this is not the set for you. Now, this concludes my comparison and review of the Hollyland Lark 150 wireless Lavalier set. I think for two people, this is a great solution, especially if you want to do those live streams, for example, on your phone or very easily to your computer in these times that we are in right now. Now, if you have any questions about the Lark 150 or anything that I have talked about here in this video, then you of course can reach out in the comment section down below. I'm open to feedback, and of course I'm also trying to answer you there or make a video specifically about your question. Now, if this video was helpful, I appreciate a thumbs up. That helps out a lot with the YouTube algorithm and also helps me understand better which type of videos you like to see more of. And if you don't want to miss out on any of my upcoming videos, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao!